I'm going to read a bit to you of Golden Goal. In this book, Jamie Johnson, a really talented young footballer, is 15 years old. The bit I'm going to read to you comes the night after he's just played a brilliant game in the Youth Cup final for Foxborough, which is one of the biggest clubs in the country. It's based on an experience I once had, because Jamie plays brilliantly, but the next day he is in the newspapers for all the wrong reasons. They're concentrating on him and his girlfriend, and he knows his manager, a guy called Sir Brian Robertson, is not going to be happy with this. Sir Brian Robertson is based partly on Sir Alex Ferguson, who I once got to interview, and I sat in his office in Manchester United's training ground for 5 minutes, and we chatted, and I couldn't believe I was there. This extract of Jamie being called to his angry manager's office is based on my experiences of meeting Sir Alex Ferguson and being in his office. I hope you like it. Brian Robertson ruled Foxborough with both an iron fist and a soft touch. Everyone at the club, even the senior players, feared him. But at the same time, he can make you feel like the greatest player in the world if he paid you even the slightest compliment. When he'd said hello to Jamie on his first day in the Foxborough Academy, Jamie had thought that he might explode with pride. That's how he can make you feel with just one word, but if you got on his wrong side, he could destroy you. He had a special way of disciplining his players. He would come up so close to you and shout so hard and loud that you could feel his hot breath gust like a hurricane into your face. The players called it the hairdryer treatment. With him and his girlfriend plastered all over the papers this morning, Jamie Johnson knew what was coming. He prepared himself for the hairdryer treatment as he knocked timidly on the door, which had manager emblazoned on the outside. "Come in," was the reply. Robertson's deep, gruff voice was one of the most famous sounds in football. Jamie pushed the heavy door open. Robertson was sitting behind his desk. He was on the phone and he was watching the scrolling headlines of Sky Sports News on the TV at the same time. He motioned to Jamie to sit on the couch. Jamie nervously shuffled his way across the room. His back was to Robertson, who was now shouting angrily down the phone. "What?" he demanded. "They can't suspend him for that. A fool could see it wasn't a deliberate elbow. What do those idiots know about football anyway? Tell them will be appealing." And with that, he slammed down the phone so hard, Jamie could feel himself flinch. Jamie looked around Brian Robertson's office. He imagined Robertson signing world-famous footballers for Foxborough in this room, on this couch. "Do you know what I want to talk to you about, son?" asked Brian Robertson as he sat down opposite Jamie. He was wearing training shorts and Jamie could see a blue vein throbbing in his calf. He'd been a striker when he'd used to play. Jamie felt as if he was in the head teacher's office about to get the biggest telling off of his life. "Yes, sir. Boss, Mr. Robertson, I'm really, really sorry. It won't happen again." Brian Robertson stared at Jamie. As the clock ticked in the corner of the room, Jamie waited for his manager to vent his fury. And then Brian Robertson smiled. "Well, you better make it happen again, son," he growled. "You were a different class last night. I want you to train with us today." Jamie was still trying to take in everything that was happening when Tommy Taylor, Brian Robertson's assistant, appeared at the doorway. "Morning, Gaffer," he said cheerily. "The lads are all here. Shall I take Jamie over?" Brian Robertson nodded and picked up his phone again. Jamie could sense it was time for him to leave. On his way out, he knocked over a pile of match DVDs that were resting on the table, but he managed to pick them up without Robertson noticing. He hoped. Jamie took in a deep gulp of air as Tommy Taylor opened the door to the first team dressing room. Jamie had always wondered what lay behind the door of a Premier League dressing room. And now, as that door opened, a new world revealed itself to Jamie. The Foxborough Stars were all there, every single one of them. They were the league leaders, about to be crowned Premier League champions for the second season in a row. Every single one of these players was a multi-millionaire. And Jamie was staring at them, open-mouthed, as if they were an exhibit in some kind of football museum. Putting his arm around Jamie, Tommy Taylor said, "Lads, this is Jamie Johnson, the winger from the youth team last night. He's with us today." Jamie could feel his whole face burn with embarrassment. Not that any of the players noticed. In fact, none of them had even looked up, because although Tommy Taylor was Robertson's right-hand man, he didn't have the same authority as the manager. As far as anyone could tell, all Tommy Taylor seemed to do was agree with Robertson and repeat what he'd just said back to him. The first team players barely registered any reaction to Tommy and Jamie's presence. They simply carried on with what they were doing, which was talking on the phone to their agents or their girlfriends. Jamie couldn't believe the amount of bling there was in one dressing room. There was enough to open up a diamond shop. "Well played last night, mate," said Dave Lewington, the Foxborough club captain, finally acknowledging Jamie's existence. "Good to have you with us today." He smiled, shaking Jamie's hand firmly. "Enjoy it." For the warm-up before training, the Foxborough players divided themselves into pairs, leaning on each other as they stretched. Jamie didn't have a partner, so he stretched his hamstrings by himself. He could feel every muscle in his body tighten when he saw Brian Robertson walk out from his office to take his place on the side of the pitch. Then Tommy Taylor got training underway. At first it was set pieces, followed by shooting practice, and then it was time for a game. Jamie knew that the worst thing he could do was think. If he thought too much, he'd start to realise that he was a 15-year-old training with the Foxborough first team. And if he realised that, then his game would most likely go to pieces. Instead, he imagined that he was a South American superstar who had just signed for Foxborough for a world record transfer fee. That made him feel more confident. Now he was ready to play. In the game, Jamie was up against the Foxborough right back, Rick Morgan. Morgan was a tall and athletic player who had made over 300 appearances for Foxborough. He'd been one of the best right backs in the country for what seemed like decades, and everyone at Foxborough called him Wolf. Jamie had no idea why his nickname was Wolf. The only thing he did know was that Morgan was 32 now and he'd started to lose a yard of pace. So the first time he was one-on-one with Morgan, Jamie knocked the ball past him and took him on. Jamie screamed past Morgan as if they were two different species. Jamie's pace was frightening. Only his miscontrol on the byline stopped him from getting in a cross. But he'd already shown what he could do. "Watch yourself," Morgan sniped into Jamie's ear as they jogged back into position. And then Morgan turned his head to the side, covered one of his nostrils with his thumb, and blew out a whole load of snot from his other nostril. The clear, phlegmy liquid landed on Jamie's boot. Jamie could have sworn Morgan had done it on purpose. He stood and stared at Morgan. What was his problem? Jamie had heard that you weren't supposed to take the mickey out of senior players in training, but that wasn't what he was doing. He was just playing his normal game. If that happened to make Morgan look like a fool, well, that was his problem, not Jamie's. Jamie only knew one thing. He would never have a better opportunity than now to impress Brian Robertson. He had to show him every skill that he had in his locker. So the next time Jamie got the ball, he did a double step over. His feet were lightning quick as they flashed over the ball. However, by now, Rick Morgan had had enough. He swiped his foot violently through both Jamie and the ball, leaving Jamie in a crumpled heap on the ground. Jamie's shin was racked with pain. He tried to get up, but he could only put his weight on one leg. This was getting serious now. "Oi, Wolf, he's only a kid," shouted Dave Lewington as he sprinted over to stand between the feuding players. "And the kid needs to learn some respect," snorted Morgan, spitting out of his mouth now. This time, he just missed Jamie's face. "Not my fault you're too slow," Jamie snapped as he got back to his feet. Morgan pushed Dave Lewington out of the way to stand face to face with Jamie. "Who do you think you are, coming onto our pitch and giving me your lip, you little runt?" he raged. "You're with the big boys now. Do you know the pain I can cause you?" On the sidelines, Tommy Taylor put his whistle into his mouth and was just about to blow. He didn't want the kid to get massacred before he even played a game for the club. But just as he was about to blow on the whistle, Brian Robertson raised his hand silently in the air, as if to say, "Just wait a second." Back on the pitch, Jamie's pulse was beginning to race. He'd been in this position before. People had always tried to bully him on the football pitch. It was their only way of stopping him. But Jamie didn't care how famous or rich Rick Morgan was. He was still a bully. And if Jamie had learned one thing, it was that you have to show bullies you're not scared of them. "Yeah?" said Jamie. "Well, it's a shame you ain't quick enough to catch me then, innit?" Jamie jogged away. He could feel his body shaking, pumping adrenaline around his veins in case this turned into a real fight. He just hoped that that wouldn't happen. It would be a terrible way to end his first training session with the Foxborough first team. "You'll get yours," Jamie heard Rick say in a cold, threatening tone behind him. "Trust me, you'll get yours." Out on the touchline, Tommy Taylor took the whistle out of his mouth and nodded to Brian Robertson. "The kid's got guts, hasn't he, Gaffer?" "Oh, he can stand up for himself, all right," was Robertson's response. And then an idea seemed to pop into Brian Robertson's head. "Tommy," he said, "how old did you say Jamie Johnson was again?"